All right, members, if we could please come to order. Sergeant at Arms, please secure the doors. Members, please take your seats. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Mr. President.
All right, this morning we are honored to have Minister Johnny Randolph Jr. from the Mount Zion United Methodist Church in Pasadena, Maryland, guest of the distinguished senator from District 31. Please rise for the invocation.
Glorious, gracious, all-powerful, and mighty God, I stand in your presence and in the presence of this body of the Maryland State Senate. Lord, I and we give you thanks for allowing us the opportunity to see such a wonderful day as this. Now, Lord, I pray that the Spirit of the living God rest, rule, and abide in and with the members of this Senate so they can go about doing work for the people of this, the free state. I pray for the spirit of unity to dwell in this place as members of this body collaborate with one another to reach a common goal. Now, God of unity and grace, should the dark spirit of division come into this Senate, I ask that you send your spirit of unification to clear the way so that they can continue to come to resolutions that will be in the best interest of their constituents. God of love, I pray that that the decisions made by this body reflect what your word has commanded us to do, which is to love our neighbors as we are to love ourselves. Now, all-powerful and healing God, I pray for this season of pandemics to be behind us. Lord, I pray for the provisions necessary that will heal your people and heal this land. God of justice, I pray for this body to re-examine social principles that often lead to and are the cause of unjust treatment towards people of color, as well as those who are disenfranchised. Lord, your word says you are not a God of division or separation. So I pray for a new season of justice and unity to be commissioned that is reflective of your word. I pray, Lord, that you continue to lead, guide, and protect members of this Senate and their families. All-knowing and powerful God, you know the needs of your people before we know. So revealing, God, show this Senate what path they are to follow. God, be a lamp unto their feet and a light upon their path. Now, gracious and merciful God, we thank you for this moment of prayer. So as I close this prayer, I ask that you keep us as we should be kept and bless us as we should be blessed. In your name do we pray. And my soul says, amen.
Amen. Chair recognizes the senator from the 31st District.
Thank you. I'd ask that the prayer be journalized.
Without objection, the pastor's prayer will most certainly be journalized. We thank you for inviting the pastor, Senator. All right. Has everyone recorded their their presence in the chamber? We'll give it a little moment as we have some last-minute entrance. Is everyone all right? The clerk will take the call. With 46 members in the chamber and a quorum being present, the Senate of Maryland is now in session. Senators, we have just a tiny bit of work to do to get through, and then we will have a bit of a different session and a tributary session for someone that we all know very, very well. Before we jump into that, let's go ahead and clear the desk so that we can do as I think the good senator would have imagined, and that is get to work. Let's start with the introduction of bills. The clerk will read the first calendar.
Introductory Senate Bills Number 14, Senate Bill 510, Senator Simonero, Sales and Use Tax, tax-free period for back-to-school shopping, sale of sewing items, B&T.
Majority Leader moves so be considered the reading of the bills. Next order of business is the introduction of legislative bond initiatives. I believe we have two calendars. The clerk will read the first calendar.
Introductory Senate Bond Initiatives Number 1, Senator Bidle, Lindale Middle School, B&T. Senator Bidle, Resiliency and Education Center at Coombe Hall.
Majority Leader moves so be considered the reading of the legislative bond initiatives. Clerk will read the next calendar.
Introductory Senate Bond Initiatives Number 2, Senator Kramer, Islamic Community Center, B&T.
Majority Leader moves so be considered the reading of the legislative bond initiatives. Next, we have a letter of reassignment. The clerk will read the letter.
In accordance with Rule 33D, the following legislation has been reassigned as indicated. Senate Bill 447, Senator Edwards, Historic Revitalization Tax Credit, Certified Historic Structure, and Single-Family Owner-Occupied Definitions, reassigned to Budget and Taxation.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. As my dear predecessor would have said, we have some great staff. But they do make some mistakes, right? So our good friend, we thank the committees for letting us move this to the appropriate committee. Next order of business is a special order calendar. Clerk will read the calendar.
Special Order Calendar Number 3, Calendar of Vetoed Bills, 2020 Policy Bills. Shall the bills pass notwithstanding the objections of the Chief Executive?
Chair recognizes the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would move that we special order this calendar to February 9th.
Tuesday, February 9th. The Majority Leader moves that we special order the calendar to the appropriate time on Tuesday, February 9th. Any objections? Without objections, so ordered. With that, Senators, the desk is officially clear of business. Let's quickly do committee announcements so that we can conclude at the end of the tribute ceremony. Let's start with Finance. Chair recognizes the Chair of Finance.
Finance is not meeting today, Mr. President.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chair recognizes the Chair of Education, Health, and Environmental Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Education, Health, and Environmental Affairs Committee will have a very brief voting session 20 minutes after the completion of our walking through the hall and seeing the late President Lion State.
Thank you, Senator. Chair recognizes the Chair of Budget and Taxation.
Thank you, Mr. President. Nothing today.
All right. Thank you, Senator. Chair recognizes the Chair of Judicial Proceedings.
Thank you, Mr. President. Nothing today. We'll be meeting after session at 1 o'clock on Tuesday.
Thank you, Senator. Are there any further announcements before we move into our second part of the session today? It does not appear so. If we could ask the governor to join us, if we're ready. So, Senators, we have a really special day today. While certainly death is always a sad thing, I think there is nothing more that Senator Thomas V. Mike Miller would have wanted than to celebrate his life. And that's what today is about. And we're going to begin by having somebody who knew him maybe longer than any of us knew him, someone that has seen the ups and the downs, the governor of this great state. And we'd like to welcome Governor Larry Hogan to provide remarks. So welcome, Governor.
Well, thank you. It's an honor to have this opportunity to be able to say a few words about my lifelong friend, Thomas V. Mike Miller, Jr. First Lady and I extend our deepest sympathies to Mike's family, to his incredible wife, Patty, whose application for sainthood I've already submitted to the Holy Father, to their children, Tommy, Missy, Michelle, Melanie, and Amanda, to Mike's 8 surviving brothers and sisters who got the experience of having Mike as the oldest brother, and of course to those 15 wonderful grandchildren. What an incredible father, grandfather, and brother you had, and how truly blessed your family was. President Ferguson, thank you for placing President Miller's portrait right here in the back of the Senate chamber, where he's staring at me right now with that smile of his, with that twinkle in his blue eyes. I've seen that look many times over the years, like he's getting ready to lambaste me if I go off course, maybe say something a little too partisan. So in Mike's honor, I'm going to start out by saying something a little partisan. As hard as this may be to believe, Mike Miller actually got his start in politics campaigning for Republicans. I'm not sure where he went off track after that, but the year was 1962. Mike was 19 years old. He was campaigning for his Clinton neighbor, Frank Small Jr., who was the Republican nominee for governor against J. Millard Tawes. And my dad was helping to run Frank Small's campaign. So Mike had two main jobs in that campaign. One was to get Frank Small elected governor, and also to occasionally babysit 5-year-old me. Mike went 0 for 2 that year, and that may explain why after that election he became a lifelong, committed, passionate Democrat. So as a kid, I was lucky enough to grow up looking up to and getting to know Mike Miller. It was the beginning of a friendship that lasted nearly 6 decades. A friendship which survived some tough partisan elections on opposite teams, and maybe some, shall I say, overheated and colorful discussions over a few hard-fought legislative battles. But ours was a friendship which only grew deeper when I got sick with cancer, and then even more so when he did. And that's not to say we didn't have our moments. I mean, we had some beauties, trust me. When Mike was your opponent, you knew you were in for a battle. But when he was on your side, he was really on your side. We still spoke quite often, even as his health declined, and as recently as just last week. As always, Mike didn't hesitate to let me know what I was doing wrong, but also how much he appreciated our relationship. Mostly he wanted to reflect on how far we two Prince George's County boys had come. And that's what always motivated Mike. He never forgot where he came from. Mike Miller was a great husband, father, and grandfather. He was a patriotic American, a proud Marylander, a lover of history, the most powerful senator, a prominent lawyer, a devout Catholic, and a passionate Terp, though not necessarily always in that order. Sitting on the court with him at Terps basketball games were some of my greatest moments with him. Thomas V. Mike Miller, Jr. worked for half a century in this historic state house. 46 years right here in this very chamber. This is the first time since 1974, when I was in high school, that a session of the Senate of Maryland is meeting without Mike Miller as a member. As a student of history, Mike's profound impact on the Senate and on the state of Maryland is truly historic. We can see Mike Miller's legacy everywhere, not just in this chamber, but throughout the entire state of Maryland. Public education, higher education, the Chesapeake Bay, our healthcare system, all bear the indelible mark of Thomas V. Mike Miller, Jr. But it is perhaps right here in this august body in this chamber where we see his greatest legacy. And on these walls, he forever joins Peka, Stone, Chase, Verta Welcome, and Charles of Carrollton. Within these historic walls, his indomitable spirit will live on forever, along with the values that he cherished and lived by. Respect for tradition, separation of powers, the dignity of every Marylander, and the greatness of the state of Maryland that he loved so much. And so, Mike, it is fitting that you were brought here to these hallowed halls before your final rest. Welcome home, my friend. On behalf of all the people of a grateful state of Maryland, we say thank you. Your legacy will not ever be forgotten. God bless you, and may you rest in peace.
Thank you so much, Mr. Governor. Thank you for being here with us and sharing those thoughts. And members, we will journalize all of the remarks today so that we have a forever record of today's events. This is not something that we will ever experience again, this ability to give tribute to somebody who spent 50 years improving the lives of millions and millions and millions of Marylanders. I've thought a lot about this moment for the last year, what it would be like, what would happen. And I keep going back to some of Mike's own advice to me. He said, in these important moments, you don't write it all down, don't read the speech. Just speak from the heart. Just speak from the heart. Which I always try to do, and try to give my own sort of personal opinions. But there were moments where, I felt like the moment called for a more formal presentation. And I said, Mike, how did you deal with this over the years? 33 years that you were able to, go to different events. How did you just not have prepared remarks for everything? He said, well, look, I blew it a couple times. But if you just rely on your humor, then you'll get your way through. You just make a couple jokes and you'll get your way through. And I looked back to him and I said, well, Mike, I'm not that funny though. And he said, well, then you're kind of screwed. So here we are, and we're just going to speak from the heart because I think that's what he would want. That's why he was able to lead this chamber for 33 years, is because he was who he was. He told everyone in the moment exactly how he felt. But I got to start with that Thomas V. Mike Miller Jr. Thomas V. Mike Miller Jr. It's quite a name, right? Everyone focuses on the Junior or the Mike. What they don't focus on, and something I've thought a lot about over the years, and especially over this last week, is the Thomas part. Thomas is a New Testament name. That means twin. We're going to hear a lot of stories today about how Thomas V. Mike Miller Jr. has no twin. There is no one like him. There has never been anyone like him. There may not be anyone like him in the future. So why twin? What is the representation there? I think what made Mike Mike was the duality of the way that he approached this work. The ability to be two people or three people or four people, depending on what the moment was and what the moment called for. The governor just said it, and it couldn't be more true. I've experienced it myself. He could be your greatest ally in a fight, the single greatest person standing by your side. He also could be the toughest opponent you could ever imagine if you were on the other side. That became pretty personal this year as we were starting to talk about what session would look like for this 2021 session in the middle of a pandemic, in which almost every conversation we had in this last year ended with, I'm so sorry. I am so sorry. I've just handed you a really bad hand. And so I had thought a lot about how am I going to tell Mike about these preparations? How are we going to, we did a lot of studying, and we talked to health experts. We'd come up with all these procedures and protocols, and I knew that Mike would really care deeply. And so I went down, and this is the last time that I saw him in person, down to his Clinton office, his law office, and walked through this PowerPoint and went through all of the pieces. And he finished, and he just said, "I'm so proud of you. I can't believe how much work's gone into this." And I'll never forget that feeling of walking out of that office and just knowing, I think I've done it right. I think I've gotten there. Fast forward a month, and our wonderful Cenopods were installed inside the chamber. And I thought, well, I got to follow up with Mike to make sure that, he sees this. And at this point, we weren't quite sure whether he was going to be coming back or not. And so they had finally gotten installed, and I stood up here and took a picture and sent a text to him and said, just wanted to make sure you saw, we talked about this plexiglass. And he didn't write back. And I thought, that's odd. He's calling me every other day, and I haven't heard from him. Another day goes by, I hadn't heard from him. And so I picked up the phone, and I called. And the other side of the equation, the other Mike, Bill, Mr. President, you've made our Senate floor look like a GD kindergarten classroom. In only the way that Mike could. He'd been stewing on it for a day and a half to give that piece of advice. That was Mike. That's who he was. He'd tell you how it is. He also had this duality in his Senate family and his blood family. He had to manage and be the leader for 175 senators over his time period as president of this Senate. Think about that, 175 members. Each and every one of them has their own story, their own experience, their own relationship, because that's where he focused, was on the people. He treated them like they were brothers and sisters, like they were friends, despite the politics, despite the partisanship. The Senate was that family. And at the exact same time, he had an incredible wife, 5 children, 15 grandchildren, that any moment that he could experience the love of what makes life great, his family. But they were these two realities that often competed with each other. And in these last few months, particularly in these last 6 months, there were many times, where Mike would call and say, "Bill, don't forget, focus on your wife and kids. Don't forget. It can get overwhelming." Because he knew how hard that struggle was to balance the work for the people and balance the work for the people that really matter. We all know he was a student. He studied history, was a voracious reader. We'll hear that many, many times. And I think that's fascinating because often people sort of think about it as a historian as just wanting to learn and know more. But I think it was different for Mike. For Mike, history was a way to study people. It was the idea that you could learn about yourself by learning from others and really understanding how the time shaped the situations. And that in any given moment, there's a lesson to be learned from many, 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 many years past. Because these situations change, but the people don't. The ideas get recycled. It was learning, and he just had this passion to know people, individual senators, his constituents, his businesses. He just wanted to learn. But then on the flip side, he also cherished being a teacher, and each of us experienced that. Standing up here, telling about history of what's on the walls, or Verda Welcome and his experiences of her fighting for civil rights and how deeply held relationships drove progress in the state of Maryland. There was this other duality that he lived with. The country boy from Clinton versus the kingmaker in Annapolis. When you think about his existence as the country lawyer from Clinton, Maryland, I think there's no better example of this duality of kingmaker and country boy than just in 2019, when the former President of the United States, Bill Clinton, came to honor Mike at our Societies of Senate Past. And for those of you who were there, that is a moment I will never, ever forget. You have one of the greatest orators of our time, President Bill Clinton, who gave these remarkable, personal, deeply held remarks. And then you had Thomas v. Mike Miller stand up and wipe the floor and just absolutely grab a hold of a room, make them laugh, make them cry, and even have the audacity to call the former president of the United States, who's standing right next to him, a redneck. You know, like, this is the Mike Miller that we all knew and loved, and make everyone laugh. It's remarkable. But I think the piece that is which I will most cherish, is the duality between the public Senator Miller and the private Senator Miller. When I first got here, he sort of kindly called me the baby senator from Baltimore, right? I sort of had this image of President Miller. He controlled everything. It was all his decisions. This is, you know, if it happened in Annapolis, it was because Mike Miller. If it didn't, it was because of Mike Miller. It was this idea that he stood up there, he was confident, he led the chamber, he would, you know, it was all through these walls that everything happened. And that was a very well-curated and created perception, because leadership requires confidence and dealing in hope. But there is a very private Mike Miller that I think less people see. And I really had the unbelievable opportunity over this last year to experience it personally and deeply see that more private side that cared so deeply about every issue, that worried about this institution on a daily basis, that would stay up at night running through his Rolodex of senators and issues and places and geography. Where can we move? Where can we fix? What can we do better? Did we get this wrong? Can we fix it? Is there an amendment? Is there a way? People didn't see that side. They didn't see the deep personal feeling that he had for each and every one of his colleagues. That's what made Mike successful, is that ability to exude confidence for this institution, because he knew that over time the politics will change, the partisanship will change, the issues will change, but this institution, this Senate of Maryland, this is what stands the test of time. That's who he was. That's what he believed. And that's why we're here today. That's why we get to celebrate an incredibly great man who was complex and challenging, but whose legacy will last for generations. Now, how do you finish in a situation? How do you truly honor an individual like Thomas V. Mike Miller? Well, it's in a way that I think he would have wanted. In 1992, he created an award, the First Citizen Award. It was based off of Charles Carroll of Carrollton. He could have picked anyone in the world to create this award and name on behalf of the Senate to give the highest honor that the Senate can give. But he chose Charles Carroll of Carrollton. And this would be no tribute to Mike Miller if there were not a bit of history. For those of you who are unaware, one of our signers of our Declaration of Independence, the reason it is called the First Citizen is because Charles Carroll of Carrollton wrote in the Maryland Gazette regularly about the importance of a separate branch of government, the legislature, why we needed independence, and the legislature was that branch that needed the strength and defending. He was also an individual born in Annapolis, died in Baltimore, who had the opportunity of being both a state legislator and a U.S. senator. One of the very, very few people in the history of this country to have done so, because it was made unlawful to do both. Charles Carroll of Carrollton chose to resign from the U.S. Senate to remain as a Maryland state senator because he believed that this place, this institution, was where the real work got done. In 1992, our friend, Mike Miller, created an award that's been given out every year. This year, we intended to give it to him in person. Unfortunately, given our circumstances, we will be offering the award posthumously. And we're going to add a bit. For the first time, and from this point forward, hopefully, we'll be providing a medal for each of the First Citizens Award, to which President Emeritus Thomas V. Mike Miller will be the first recipient, which I think is only fitting. And so when we process out of the chamber today, My hope is that senators will join me so that we as a body can present an award that meant so much to Mike Miller because it represented everything that lasts, the things that really matter. It represents this place, this space, in this most difficult and divided time. So with that, I want to conclude by simply saying to our friend, President Emeritus Thomas V. Mike Miller, to the senator from the 27th District, while your journey is a journeying sine die, please know that this state, this institution, this chamber, this body, and these people are forever grateful for the leadership and legacy that you leave behind. Rest in peace, rest in power, and rest in love. Thank you all. We next have a few presentations virtual, and of course, if this were different circumstance, we would this might be a very different venue. But given the circumstances that we are in with the pandemic, we've tried to make the best of a very unique situation. And so we are joined remotely, first by the youngest ever, to which he, I think, specifically wanted to be reminded, Senate President of the Senate of Maryland, the Majority Leader of the House of Representatives, and Congressman Hoyer, who was Senator from 1967 to 79 and was Senator Miller's first Senate President from 1975 to 79. I think the story that they both tell each other whenever they are around is that every time Senator Miller ran for election, he and Majority Leader Hoyer ran on the same ticket. If we could please recognize Majority Leader Hoyer.
Mike Miller was my friend for over 50 years. So I knew Mike Miller very, very well, and he was an exceptional human being, one of a kind in many ways. Tough and gruff, smart as a whip, but also kind and considerate of others when he wanted to be. And when he thought others were trying to take advantage of people, he was right there in the front line, making sure it didn't happen. Mike Miller will long be remembered as not only an extraordinary legislator, an extraordinary politician, but an extraordinary human being as well.
We thank the Majority Leader for his remarks. Next, we have another former senator who was extremely close to our dear friend, former senator and cabinet secretary, who Senator Miller credited for designing the Miller Senate Office Building, and most recently and most relevantly was one of two senators that Senator Miller claimed credit for flipping political parties. With that, we will hand over to Secretary and Senator Neal.
The privilege and the highest of honors to have been asked to speak on this solemn occasion. There are many who are more worthy than I to give these remarks. It's my hope that my words may capture some of the things they may have said. We extend our profound sympathy to Patty and Mike's family and offer our heartfelt thanks for the loving care they rendered to Mike during his long illness. It was a comfort to all of Mike's friends that he was always surrounded by love and support. Mike Miller was the most fascinating person I ever met. He was a unique combination of intellect, personality, energy, passion, humor, and guile. All of this was veneered with an outsized personality which craved action and the company of people. His moods could change as quickly as Maryland weather. That his mind was always at work. That mind, what a thing of beauty. He could recall obscure snippets of history, tell you the flip side of a title of a record from the 1950s, quote passages from his favorite books, and assemble his latest legislative strategy simultaneously. I envied his command of profanity, a true art form. He would use all the words and all the parts of speech and would weave them into a ribald tapestry, a torrent of words that would fill the air and linger, true poetry. It was symphonic, awe-inspiring. It was Mike. He had other qualities. No one was more formidable in legislative combat. No one was more persuasive in crucial situations. No one was more faithful in friendship, and no one was more kind in tender moments. He treated the members of the Senate like family. He attended thousands of events, fundraisers, weddings, funerals, family gatherings. He was also a prolific note writer, congratulatory, condolences, whatever the occasion. Mike was fun to be with. The Senate sessions, the parties, the dinners, the card games, the trips, and for me, the conversations. We all have our own memories of Mike. One of mine involves his hair. Before Mike allowed his hair to go white, he struggled for years to color his hair. The dye did the job, but there was a consistency problem. P.J. Hogan, Mac Middleton, and I would speculate each week as to what color his hair would be when he took the rostrum. Mike loved to laugh, and he had three types. A furtive, under-his-breath chortle that was just for you, an everyday vernacular ha 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 for small talk and polite company, and then a throw his head back, body contorting, primal scream, which we all loved, even if it was at our expense. He played golf enthusiastically, but he was haunted by the fact that he could never be as good as Patty. Patty was Mike's loving companion for nearly 60 years. Her love and support was a big reason for Mike Miller's success. It had to be difficult to live with a human cyclone, but Patty made it look easy with charm, class, and good humor. For many of us, a world without Mike Miller is a lesser world. Less fun, less exciting, less stimulating. His passing leaves a void in many of our lives that can't be filled, only soothed by loving memories. President Biden, no stranger to grief, said that to heal, one has to remember. I will remember, as will we all. President Biden also said that one never gets over the loss of a loved one, but there will come a time when a memory will bring a smile to your face before tears to your eyes. I anxiously await that day, if ever it comes. I will not dwell on his many accomplishments. They are part of history. I would just offer this. Nothing of consequence was enacted during his presidency without his support. His storied tenure in the General Assembly comprised over 20% of Maryland's history as a state. He helped thousands of people one by one during his 5-decade career, and millions more by his legislative vision and leadership. His body of work will stand unsurpassed and unequal for all time. Like Casey Single used to say, you can look it up. I must say a word about the special people who staffed Mike throughout the years. Mike was both mentor and tormentor. He loved them, but it was often tough love. Yet each of them had a special relationship with Mike, and I offer condolences to them all. It's wonderful that Mike's portrait hangs in the Senate chamber. No one is more deserving. I can envision future Senate presidents pointing to it and telling the assembled about the legendary Mike Miller, the Lion of the Maryland Senate, who ruled the rostrum for over 3 decades. And of course, they'll be doing their work in the Miller Senate office building. One of Mike's true gifts was perspective. He always knew exactly where we were on the road to change. Like a skilled railroad engineer, he had his hand on the throttle of change and moved us fast enough to overcome obstacles, yet slow enough so as not to derail the train. Mike often said, I cannot predict the future, but I can tell you what's going to happen. Mike made it happen over and over and over. We will all miss what I called Miller Minutes, where he stopped the Senate proceedings to treat us to a historical vignette, his way of sharing his vast knowledge about our beloved state. Mike had a special love for his alma mater, the University of Maryland. His support was both strident and perpetual. College Park and the entire university system are adorned with many Miller-inspired improvements. As Mike confronted his final days, his approach was vintage Miller. He was open, candid, and matter of fact. In his inimitable way, Mike took care of his personal business, gradually withdrew from the Senate arena, spent countless hours consoling us and saying his goodbyes, and when all was done, he simply stepped aside, showing great dignity and courage throughout. To Mike, this was not about him, but about us. Our grief, our anxiety, and our feelings. Through illness and pain, Mike conducted his passing according to his plan. In the interest of full disclosure, when the priest gets to the point in tomorrow's service about one of God's sheep returning to the fold, Mike will no doubt be one of the Creator's most willful and rambunctious sheep. How does one say goodbye to such a dear friend? How does one properly thank someone for all he did for others? Mike would insist that we have already given him all the thanks and all the farewells anyone had a right to expect. His only expectation is that we continue the work, care for each other, and live our lives to the fullest. That's Mike's wish for us. So I will defy Mike Miller one more time by saying, farewell, Mr. President. We shall all miss you terribly. We are deeply grateful for all you have done for our beloved state and for us. Thank you for leading and teaching us. Thank you for the thousands of memories you made for those of us who were fortunate enough to have spent time in your presence. Please know that we will hold you in our hearts and fondly remember our time together. Farewell, Mike Miller. We love you, we miss you, and we will cherish your memory. I will look for you when I reach the other side. Until then, rest in peace, my friend. Rest in peace.
Well said. Well said. Our final virtual remarks will be from another one of our former colleagues, a colleague that President Emeritus Miller put me next to in my very first year, and I think it was to put under her watchful eyes. Someone that chaired our Education, Health, and Environmental Affairs Committee and who was incredibly great friends with President Miller when they were not at each other's throats. With that, let's hear from Senator Joan Carter Conway.
To Patty, the Miller family, and the Senate body. President Thomas V. Mike Miller is known and respected nationally for his unwavering service to the legislature, more specifically, the Maryland Senate. His commitment to preserving the stability and economic viability of the state of Maryland was one of Mike's highest priorities, notwithstanding his immense love for his family that he cherished. But let me tell you what you don't know. I and Mike had a love-hate relationship exclusively relating to legislative issues, but what he did not know, I was as stubborn and determined as he was. The president would inform me of which bills he wanted on the floor and which ones he didn't. I respected his position as my president, but I would not comply. Mike was always concerned about the decorum of the august body of the Senate and indicated the bills were too controversial, not to mention the exchange of many expletives that we would exchange. Mike would become visibly upset when I would kill the governor's bills. I would agree with Mike to make a motion to reconsider the bill only if, and only if, he accepted my amendments, which made it a much better bill. I have a special place in my heart for Mike. As conservative as I thought he was, but he was really a kind, deeply caring, and loving person. But that was not the image he wanted to project. He was responsible for my ascension in the Senate, appointing me as the first Black woman to chair a standing committee. Also, not only was it in the Maryland Senate, I was the first black woman chair in the Maryland General Assembly. Mike, I will miss you, your texts, your phone calls, our debates specifically as it relates to what is politically correct as opposed to doing what is right and just. He would respond, "You're right, but Maryland is not quite ready yet, John." In closing, I will share with you one of Mike's latest texts that he sent me. "People will never know the scores of positive change that you insisted upon, fighting on behalf of your constituency and the changes that were made simply because of your presence. The hollow halls of the Maryland Senate will never be the same without Mike. Ditto." And Mike knows exactly what this is. Love you, my friend. Peace and eternal rest in the loving arms of our Savior.
As genuine as it gets. Chair recognizes the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. As I gathered my thoughts about what I would say today, I thought about a song we used to sing when I was involved in Girl Scouts, and it had the verse, "Make new friends but keep the old. One is silver and the other gold." Colleagues, a friendship with Mike Miller was pure gold. A friendship with Mike was one that guaranteed laughter, caring, loyalty, and maybe just a little profanity. That friendship did not guarantee blind loyalty, though. Friend or not, Mike was quick to let you know if you did or said something he didn't like, but he was just as quick to offer praise for your accomplishments. And perhaps most importantly, he was always there if you needed encouragement or a kind word when going through a difficult time. I had gallbladder surgery a couple weeks ago, and who was the first person that called me on the phone when I came up from the recovery room? It was Mike, making sure that I was okay. The state of Maryland has lost its most devoted champion, but to my colleagues, both past and present, and I, who were lucky enough to call Mike a friend, we have lost a personal cheerleader, a confidant, and a man who was pure gold. There's an old saying, be the things you loved most about the people who are gone. One of the many things I loved about Mike was his drive to ensure that the Maryland Senate worked together as a family, with each of us having the other's backs, and I hope in his honor that we in the Senate can continue that. It has been so special to me during my time in the Senate, and Mike has always really encouraged us to be there for each other and be friends. Even though we argue at times, we're still there to cover each other. And I hope all of us will take the things we love the most about Mike and use them to comfort us and make us do just a little bit better each and every day. And in that way, we celebrate and remember our friend, Thomas V. Mike Miller. God bless you, Mike.
Well said. Thank you, Madam Majority Leader. Chair recognizes the Minority Leader.
Thank you. Senator Miller and I started off on very partisan battlefield, but over the years we both mellowed and became good friends. Given that I served with Senator Miller for a decade and a half, I want to share a couple stories with the body that will give you some insight from the minority standpoint about the man, the myth, the former Senate President, Mike Miller. My first meeting with him was after my election in 2006. We had just finished a bitter election where I won by a scant 600 votes, and he asked to meet with me before the General Assembly met. Now understand, one of Mike's strengths in building alliances was to tell you what you wanted to hear, but this was a stretch even for Mike. The first thing he said to me was, "Welcome to the Senate. I just wanted to let you know I had nothing to do with those negative campaign mailers against you." At first, I didn't know how to respond to that statement, but I said, "Winning is an amazing healing balm, so we're good." Another one of my early interactions with Senate President Miller demonstrated he didn't let battles stop him from working with every senator. Neither of us were very bashful in our communication styles. We had a unique way of getting each other's attention. I remember one session in the early years, I wanted to get the president's attention over a few issues. Imagine the setting. The Senate was buzzing with excitement for a new session. The script had been written for how things were to proceed. Senators' friends and families were seated all across the floor, and it was a festive scene. Then came the formality of voting in the new Senate president. Then the vote was called. Votes of green assembled all over the board. Then there was one red vote. It seemed like an attorney waiting for the clerk to take the call. To get his attention, I decided not to vote for him for being Senate president on opening day. I remember a page on the floor saying, "Senator, you hit the wrong button. You hit the wrong button." Then they realized it wasn't a mistake. That was followed by my seatmate, then Senator Barry Glassman, slowly moving away from me, saying he didn't want any of that. Needless to say, I got his attention. In fact, I was called into his office shortly afterwards. After his blood pressure went down, we had a great talk and moved on. Then, to my surprise, I got a phone call every year thereafter asking for my vote. Being in the minority party had its challenges, and it should be noted and recognized that Senator Miller worked with the minority party. He would respect and listen to the minority party, and I think that's a big reason Annapolis is not like Washington, D.C. If the minority party doesn't feel like they have a voice in the process, then it creates a fertile environment for partisan quarreling and nasty politics. Senator Miller loved the Senate and wanted to function the best possible way for the people of Maryland, and we are grateful for his leadership in working together. One last story is about Senate President Miller interacting with people. Living close to Annapolis, I would frequently have visitors in the Senate. There wasn't a time when I saw Senator Miller in the hallway or the chamber that he wouldn't stop by and make my constituents feel special and throw in a little history lesson on the side. He had a special way of making people feel welcome and part of this great institution. Senate President Miller was tough as nails in leading the Senate, but he was also a kind and tender person. Even though we often disagreed on policy, he was so kind to me and my family. I remember one session, my son worked a bill to promote the youth in our state, and he walked the bill around to get all 47 senators to co-sponsor it. As the bill came to the floor, Senator Miller invited my son to come to the floor. He was always like that to the Senate family members. After the bill passed, Senator Miller asked his staff to print out the vote count. He wrote a sweet note on it and signed it and handed it to my son. My now 26-year-old son still has that note. That kindness was not always in public sight, but we as senators knew it and so appreciated it. Senate President Miller was a once-in-a-generation politician. There was no one like him. There will be no one like him in the future. At the end of the day, we are a family, and when we heard the passing of Senator Miller, both Republicans and Democrats felt a great loss. We will miss you, Mike, but we will never forget you or the positive impact you had on our state.
Thank you so much, Senator. Chair recognizes the Chair of Education, Health, and Environmental Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. President. About a week ago, there was an article about the freshman class from 2 years ago. The freshman class, particularly those freshmen who Mike Miller worked to defeat, who he opposed. And he wanted to meet with them and bring them into the Senate fold. Well, I can tell those colleagues that I too was opposed by Senate President Miller when I first ran. So you weren't alone. And I didn't even have an incumbent that I was running against. Mike actually recruited people to run against me, as some of you know, until there was a very frank discussion one June day at Bull Roast in Largo, Maryland, and then it stopped. And then Mike welcomed me in as well. You know, Mike and I had differences on ideology, on politics, on processes, and I think if we could characterize the first number of years, you were dealing with two hardheads who butted heads. And frequently I would challenge Mike on the floor or in caucus. And for those keeping track, he had the winning record and I didn't. He was the master and I was the rookie. But over time, I learned a lot from Mike. A great deal, as all of us did. You know, one day, before a delegation meeting, we were meeting, I think, on the first floor of the James building. And it was Senator Green from Bowie and the late Senator Bucky Trotter, Art Dorman, and others. And it was before the meeting, and Mike suggested something. And I naively said, "Can you do that?" He said, "Paul, if you have the votes, you can do anything." It was vintage Mike Miller, as we know Mike. Now, sometime later, there was an attempted palace coup, an attempt to overthrow the king. And one day during the tumult, Mike called me at my office. And he said, "I'm just checking in." Well, that was Mike Millerese for "I'm counting my votes." Not surprising. Eventually, the conversation got around to, "Where are you going to be, Paul? Are you going to be with them? Are you going to be with me?" And I said, "Look, Mike, the people running against you are pretty conservative. If they were promoting a progressive agenda, you can bet damn sure I'd be with them. But the fact is, I'd like to stay with a conservative I knew and I have a relationship with." And Mike's answer was very interesting. He said, "You know what, Paul? That's what I expected you to say." He knew me. He knew what I would probably do. And sometime later, even though I continued to challenge him in public, he supported me for delegation chair and chair of one of the special committees. He didn't have to do it. He didn't have to do it. You know, eventually our adversarial relationship turned to one of mutual respect. I respected what he advocated for, University of Maryland system in College Park and full funding. He fully got behind the Thornton Commission. And when he realized we needed a gas tax, he got behind a gas tax. And as you know, Mike is not a tax and spend liberal. And I really respected that and appreciated that. And even when Kerwin was just beginning, he said, "I'm committed to this." Look, he was a master politician, we know that. He was also a psychologist and a sociologist. And while his advanced degree was in law, I think he should have had a PhD in the other fields as well. He knew what you were thinking, what your emotions were, the button that pushed you. And he also knew what moved people, groups of people, and the sociology of group dynamics. He understood that, and that's what made him a great politician. He was also very loyal. He was super loyal. You know, Rashawn Baker, my friend and former county executive, Prince George's County, told a story just the other day. He said, look, Mike would harangue him, attack him, criticize him, and at the end of the conversation, he said, "We'll get it done." If Mike said, "We'll get it done," he'd get it done. And I was one of those beneficiaries in the last 4 or 5 or 6 years to hear those words, "We'll get it done." But we know Mike was a complicated character. A lot of people, a lot of us, would approach him with an ask. Lobbyists would approach him with an ask. And of course, he couldn't accede to all of them. So the ask would happen in his office back here, and you'd get this vague nod, which was not a commitment, although some people would leave those meetings with their head over their skis thinking they had what they wanted. There's a difference between "we'll get it done" and "uh-huh." And we all learned that, and probably a few times it saddened and hurt us. But just as, you know, the adversarial relationship turned to mutual respect, the mutual respect turned to friendship. And I never thought that would happen, I have to tell you. You know, we sat close by at the Terp games, particularly prior to the last year when he had trouble making the steps and he sat with the governor on the floor. He was a couple rows apart from me. He was, I think, row 8, section 102. I could be wrong. And Joan and I would go, and he'd say hello, and we'd talk, and he really liked Joan a lot, I think sometimes more than myself. But at halftime, we'd talk basketball, we'd talk politics. And then, obviously, over a couple years ago when Mike was diagnosed, which changed a lot in the state and for he and his family and us, sometime later, Joan was diagnosed with cancer, a different type, albeit. And he'd always ask me, how's she doing? And she was undergoing treatment, and Mike was undergoing treatment. And as late as either 10 or 12 days before his passing, he called me one afternoon or one evening. And he said, I'm thinking about Joan, I'm thinking about you. How you guys doing? How are you doing? You know, I think of her memory. And I have to tell you, it was a pretty emotional phone call for both of us. You know, I asked him about his health, and he said, look, I don't know if it's 2 days, 2 weeks, or 2 months, which was the exact same phrase I heard a doctor tell me about my wife. So Mike really cared, as a number of people have said. He really cared about people, and he was loyal to people. You know, there was a news reporter, columnist in New York 80, 90 years ago, a guy named Damon Runyon. And people talk about a Runyon-type character. And, you know, in some ways we have our own Runyon-type character in Dan Roderick's, who talks about the everyday person, the common person in the Baltimore Sun. And this is what Dan said about Runyon. He didn't write about the major political issues of the day, but how people worked, played, dreamed, and schemed. He put flesh and blood where they had been only the vaguest outline of humanity. And Runyon said about himself, when he defined a character, someone distinctive, colorful, and interesting. Distinctive, colorful, and interesting. That defines Mike Miller. And it was that character, that person who was distinctive, colorful, and interesting, who spent his life serving the state of Maryland. The state will miss him. We will miss him. And I can only say farewell, my friend.
Thank you, Senator. Chair recognizes the chair of the Finance Committee.
Now that I have the mic on, colleagues, Mike and I go back for a while. When I left the Environmental Matters Committee and came over with my seatmate and Van Hollen, and just there were 9 of us, all who came together in 1995, I believe. Mike sent for me while he was making up his mind where he would place me in terms of a committee assignment. And we talked about all kinds of things. And he questioned things I had done while on the Environmental Matters Committee. So I knew he had studied everybody's record and what we were like and how we behaved and so on. And he said, well, I'm going to put you with Walter Baker. I said, with Senator Baker? He says, yes, you're going on judicial proceedings. And of course, Senator Baker seemed like a crusty old man who would have nothing in common with a person like me, I thought. But he also, Mike, that is, told Baker, she's good serving on committees outside of the General Assembly. And so we need somebody on the Article 29 committee. And the code was numbered then instead of named. And so Mike says, if you want to show me what you're made of, I want you to serve on this committee. Well, I found out the committee met at night in Crownsville. And I had to, as a freshman here, get my husband to drive me down because I'm bad on the road at night. And so the Article 27 committee. But Mike would call me in from time to time just to check how I was doing and to talk to me and to see what else he would assign me to do. Altogether, Mike actually had me work on 19 either statewide or interstate committees and bodies. So I learned a lot about public policy sometimes from all the stuff that Mike had me doing. Mike was a poet. Mike was an intellectual. He would curse me out in a minute if he didn't like a bill that I had, and he thought I was really pushing to get it through. And the last bill that Mike and I really interacted on was one where he called me in to offer me what he said was a friendly amendment. I don't like the GD bill, but I'm going to help you. And I was so glad he was saying he would help me that I accepted, and the amendment went forth. And I realized later the amendment really made the bill worth nothing. But I had given my word. When Mike's mom died, I got to know him even better. And I went to her funeral and passed by the store that his family had run when he was a kid, where he sometimes worked. And I would check on him because he was close to his mom, and that kind of got to him. And I realized that Mike had a really deep spiritual side. And in a way, I thought so did I. And so we would talk about God and about religion and things like that. And I want to close by citing bits of poetry that Mike and I sometimes talked about. He had a truly metaphorical way of seeing life. And just a verse of William Wordsworth's ode to Imitations of Immortality, I think, tells me something about the way he really saw his boyhood and his youth. Our birth is but a sleep and a forgetting. The soul that rises with us, our life star, has had elsewhere its setting and cometh from afar. Not in entire forgetfulness and not in utter nakedness, but trailing clouds of glory do we come from God, who is our home. And then, I talked about Tennyson and his crossing the bar. Sunset, an evening star, and one clear call for me. And may there be no moaning at the bar when I put out to sea. But such a tide as moving seems asleep, too full for sound and foam, when that which drew from out the boundless deep turns again home. Twilight, an evening bell, and after that, the dark. And may there be no sadness or farewell when I embark. For though from out our bourne of time and place the flood may bear me far, I hope to see my pilot face to face when I have crossed the bar. And then finally, given that Mike really was like the general in an army, he put things in place. He let us know how important it was, the impact we would have on posterity and what our job was. I'd like to close with words penned by John McCrae, a colonel in World War I in Flanders Fields. In Flanders Fields the poppies blow, between the crosses, row on row that mark our place. And in the sky, the larks, still bravely singing, fly, scarce heard amid the guns below. We are the dead. Short days ago we lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders Fields. Take up our quarrel with the foe. To you, with failing hands, we throw the torch. Be yours to hold it high. If you break faith with those of us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders Fields. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you, Senator. Chair recognizes the senator from Baltimore County.
Thank you, Mr. President. of the things that I have been hearing are the things that have been going through my mind for the past few days as everyone else. But I'm just going to begin as time goes by. If you want to hum that little song in your mind. One of my legislative aides said I'd never heard that song before. It made me feel pretty old. My journey with President Mike Miller began in 1994 on the first freshman tour after being elected to the House of Delegates. Very wet behind the ears, very nervous, I met Mike Miller, and it was a thrill. I had heard lots about him, good and bad. As time went by, watching and listening from the House of Delegates, I heard many stories about President Miller that made me shiver. It made me wonder if I ever wanted to go to the Senate. As time went by, I became a senator. I had the opportunity to really meet President Miller again. He was not the man I envisioned. He was caring, he was nice, had a great sense of humor, and he never twisted my arm too much. He was President Mike Miller, one of a kind who loved his Senate family. As time went by, I knew him, loved him, and I will miss him. I do know that every time I look in the mirror, I will think of him. He began with reddish brown hair, just like me, and it went white, just like mine. I told him a while back that we could be brother and sister, and he just laughed. And as he would say, it is what it is.
Well said. Chair recognizes Senator from Baltimore County, 7th District.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I started my career in the legislature over in the House. When you're in the House, you come out of the chamber, you look in the Senate, you don't dare step on the floor. You look at it in a kind of mystique way, and you see the big guy up there at the rostrum with that big gold ring he always had on his hand. I guess it was his class ring. And he was an intimidating guy. And I'd see him in the House chamber or the House building once in a while or walking across. Never said hi to him. You just kind of kept your distance because I was a House member. When I got elected to the Senate, I met with him for the first time, and I went in a little intimidated. I realized, hey, he's not that bad of a guy. And over the years, I found myself starting to like him. And that was hard. I'm like, I'm not supposed to like this guy. He's the enemy. We're supposed to hate each other and fight. But I found out I love the guy. Many of us did. I mean, he was a passionate person. He cared about us. He cared about our families. And he built relationships with us that meant a lot. And being in the Senate is an honor for each and every one of us. There's no doubt. But I got to tell you, unless you've served in the House, you don't know how great it is over here. Because he ran it different. He made sure every one of us was part of the team. 47 of us. No, we may not be rowing the right way or the same way, but we knew we were part of the fight. We could say what we wanted, fight as hard as we can, as long as we respected each other. The fact that many of us on this side give floor reports, some of us have subcommittee chairmanships, it showed how much he respected us, as long as we respected him. When I became minority leader, I'd meet with him most mornings before session, walk in. Sometimes it'd be a 5-second conversation. Hey, boss, what's going on? What are we doing today? I'd kiddingly call him boss. Sometimes it was great. Other times it was not good. He'd be mad. He started reading social media posts. And I'd tell him, don't read the posts. Don't read them. They're just people out there. Just forget it. And he'd get mad. And we've heard about sometimes the language he would use. And he had the ability of taking 4-letter words you're not supposed to use and combine them together. He'd be in there yelling at me and, look at this. Look what they said about me. Rah, 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 rah. I'd be, Mike, we know it's different. Don't worry about it. But that was Mike. I mean, as we said, his temperature would change. He sat up there like a field marshal looking on a battlefield at us. And it was amazing to watch him. And, over my tenure sitting up front here, I could see how he worked. And I would notice that he would change, he'd go back and forth, and he could moderate the debate. And sometimes, if it was going a certain way, he was very good at taking us off kilter. He'd knock us off. So, especially this side of the aisle, we lost our focus. And it took us a while to get the momentum back. And I remember one time in particular, the Minority Whip and I went up there to meet with him. And we were huge debate going on. We're in it. I'm like, Steve, let's talk to him. So we go up there, we're talking to him, and Mike's like, I get it, I understand. And all of a sudden he goes and he points to one of the statues up there and says, you know, this marble came from the Eastern Shore or something. And my seatmate goes, really? And he starts talking about it. I'm like, hey, get back on subject. And that was Mike. He was amazing with the way he could command this chamber. He humanized it too. I mean, he stood up there, he was self-deprecating. I remember there were a couple, the day after Valentine's Day, when he would bring in the stuffed bears that Patty would give him, and he'd, you know, tell us what happened and dance up there. You know, that was the Mike we loved. Over the last year, I would speak to him every few weeks. I'd call him, and sometimes he'd call me. And, you know, some of those conversations, when he answered the phone, he seemed strong. You know, he was healthy, sounded great. Others, he seemed a little weak. 2 weeks ago, or 2.5 weeks ago, I called him. And when he answered the phone, I could tell. It was probably the last time I'd ever talked to him. It was a tough conversation. And we spoke for about 15 minutes, talked about all kinds of stuff, family. You know, he always asked about my kids, my wife. And, you know, at the end of the conversation, I told him I loved him. I'm sorry what he's going through. And he said that famous word that we always hear, or phrase from him, it is what it is. But at the end of the conversation, he said to me, pal, do the best you can do. That's what he would always say to us. Just do the best you can do. And that was Mike. And if you remember a couple years ago, we had a speaking class on the floor about how to deliver floor reports. Making sure that we made eye contact, we spoke from the heart, we didn't read, we knew what we were talking about. That was Mike. He wanted the best from each of us. He wanted to make sure we knew what we were doing and we believed in it. And he understood that, you know, Maryland's a big state with a lot of different issues and regions, and we got to represent all of them. And he would make sure he watched out for the Eastern Shore on issues, or Western Maryland, or Baltimore City. I mean, that was him. He loved this state. And as I close here, the one thing I'll say is he loved history, and there's no doubt we knew that. I mean, the way he could tell the stories of the signers of the Declaration, or, you know, you go into the old Senate chamber, he made history come to life, and it was amazing. And, you know, sometimes you'd sit there and you close your eyes, it was like you were there, even though you weren't. And you wondered what it was like, but with the way Mike would tell you, it made you feel that way. And as I think of that, I think of a quote from Dr. Seuss. Don't cry because it's over, smile because it happened. And I say that because I know many of us have cried over the last week, knowing that he's gone. But I smile because in 150 years, when people are in this building, in this chamber, talking, and they're talking about Mike Miller and how he was a Senate president, I'm going to smile that each and every one of us had the honor of sitting in the front row and watching the history of Thomas V. Mike Miller. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Chair recognizes the senator from Prince George's County, 24th District.
Thank you, Mr. President. A rare breed. To everything, there is a season, and a time for every purpose under the heavens. Ecclesiastes, the 3rd chapter, 1st verse. Thomas V. Mike Miller. And I had the most wonderful and interesting relationship. As you are aware, his mother was a teacher, so we had that in common. And his father inherited a business in Clinton known as B.K. Miller's. In 2012, after I won the Senate seat for the 24th Legislative District, I was summoned to the President's office. I remembered, after he called me, a blowout that Elijah Cummings and I had with Mike Miller. And I said to myself, I'm just wondering how this conversation is going to go. And so I called my wonderful friend, Steny Hamilton Hoyer, and I said, listen to me carefully. I am not going to put up with any foolishness from Mike Miller. Steny responded, Joanne, you're going to do fine, because beneath that gruffy voice is a great giant of a gentleman who has a heart for the people in his district and in the great state of Maryland. A person who loves his family, a person who loves God, a person who cares about those who can't speak for themselves. And so as Steny described Mike Miller, I said, listen, here's what I'll do. Whatever it takes, I'm going to try to get along with this man. So when I went into his office, he was standing in that office over there. He didn't even say hello. He said, I'm nervous. I said, why are you nervous? He said, you make me nervous. I said, listen here. There is no need for you to be nervous. As a matter of fact, have a seat. And so he went, and he sat himself down. I began to talk to him. Now, he had called the meeting, but I said, I better command this conversation here. I said, listen, one of my favorite words, one of my top priorities will be the people that I serve in the 24th Legislative District. Let me tell you right now, I'm not here to be the chairman of anything. I don't have to tell anybody about my leadership because I was a leader before I came down here. He sat down and a great friendship blossomed. I went with him to church down in southern Maryland in Calvert County because at one point in time I lived there. And I developed a wonderful friendship with many of the people in that community. I went with him to a lot of the activities that were in his district. But you know, let me say this. Whenever I called on him, whenever I asked him to help me with anything, he never said no. But whenever he needed my help, I tried not to say no, but there were some times where I had to say no to him. And of course, he and I would go in the office, close the door, scream and holler, and say some nasty things to each other. And then we would come out and no one would ever know that we were disagreeing. He visited my office, which was very unusual. And I think one of the reasons why he loved my office was that each year his family would send a Christmas card, as some of these wonderful senators do, send me Christmas cards of the little children. I love that. I am a family person. And so he enjoyed looking at the Christmas cards from year to year, which started out with just a couple of little children, his grandchildren, and then the next thing I knew, there were about 14, 15 grandchildren, and he and I laughed about that. If I needed food for the people in my district, if I needed housing, I'd like to just relate one little story. I got a phone call, and there were 8 women who were sleeping in the basement of a church that happened to be in his district. I called him, and I said, listen, I just got a phone call. There are 8 women with children in the basement of this church. And I am ready to roll up my sleeves so that we can find a home and find peace and love and hope for these women. He said, we're going to do this together. And he and I worked together to find homes for those 8 women and their little children. That's the thing that people really don't know about Mike Miller. He had a heart. He had a heart for the little people. He cared about his community. He did so many wonderful things. When we had to distribute turkeys and clothes and shoes, I would call Mike Miller, and he would always respond. So he never said no. When I heard that he was having a house built in Calvert County, I really didn't like that, to be honest with you. But I had to deal with it, and I wasn't going to tell him I didn't like it. And so I went down to Calvert County, and my friends, I have a couple of friends that live down the road from him. I said, you all know where Mike Miller is having his house built? They said, oh, yeah. Yeah, we know exactly where it is. So we went on down. I went on in and looked. They were just putting the shovel in the dirt, just getting ready to build the foundation. There were these no trespassing signs. But needless to say, I didn't pay that any attention. So I went on in there and looked around a little bit and came on out. I came down here and I called him and I said, oh, Senator Miller, I just came from Calvert County. I see where you're having your house built. He said, did you see those no trespassing signs? I said, yes, I certainly did, but I didn't think those signs were meant for me. He said, that's you, Joanne Benson. And so I could go on and on talking about my wonderful friend. When I found out he was not doing well, I said, let me go to the store, get a little something for him. So let me find some vitamins and let me find out all the things. So I went in the drugstore and began to pick vitamins and do things and took the shopping bag down and went back and forth. I said, did you take the medicine? He said, Joanne, I'm taking enough medicine. I said, no, I want you to take this medicine. So there's Patty. Patty said, look over there. That's the medicine he's taking. So I wasn't going to continue to argue with Mike Miller about the vitamins that I had sent down. But I went back and forth because I really appreciated what he did for the great state of Maryland. The state of Maryland is what it is today because of his leadership. He led the Senate chamber with an iron fist, and he cared about people. He cared about if someone was having a problem in their family, he cared about the people. He took this Senate chamber very personal. And I really want you all to know how much that meant to me. And so he operated with integrity. He had strength. He was determined to get things done for the good of the people. And there were some pieces of legislation that I felt were impossible for us to pass here. But with his influence, he was able to get it done. His word was his bond. If he disagreed with something, he wasn't going to go around the corner, say one thing, and come back around the corner and say something different. He said what he meant, and he meant what he said. And so, in calling him on the phone, in having this wonderful friendship, I can tell you all without fail, we're going to have to move on. As my pastor said to me the other day, Senator Benson, we've got to keep it moving. And we in this chamber must keep it moving. Not for us, but for future generations. He was a great lover of history. He came from an educated family where his mother insisted that he go to law school. You all know the story. We need to cut out all foolishness in this chamber and focus on what is in the best interest of those who are going to come along after we are gone. That should be on our heart and in our soul as we come into this chamber. And finally, the last time that I saw Mike, he had been on the telephone when I came in, and so I had to stand to wait for him to finish his conversation. He said, "Oh, I got to go, Senator Vincent's here." And he and I exchanged wonderful conversation. I said, "I'll see you later." He said, "Okay." On the way out the door, he said, "Joanne." I said, "What now?" He said, "I want you to know that I love you." And I said, "I love you a bushel and a peck and a hug around your neck. You are a rare breed." That's what I said to him. So if Senator Miller was here, his message to us would be the following: I have fought a good fight. I have finished my course. I have kept the faith. 2 Timothy, the 4th chapter, and the 7th verse. Let's continue to pray for Mike Miller's family, for his divine and devoted and wonderful, wonderful wife, Patty, for his children, for his grandchildren. But we also must have the desire, like I do every day of my life, is to pray for each other. I don't leave my home without praying for this General Assembly and each senator and the families. And we've got to do that. No foolishness in here. We've got to move the agenda and support this wonderful president. Let's love each other. And if we disagree, let's not be disagreeable and ugly acting. Let's move it on. God bless all of you all. And yes, we're going to keep it moving for the sake of Mike Miller and future generations. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. The unenviable task of following the senator, her colleague and seatmate.
Agreed.
The senator from Prince George's County.
Okay. I started here in 2007, and I sat in the rear with the senator from Ocean City sitting right now. And Mike made it very clear that was the first desk that he sat at when he came, and he had big expectations for me. So, I was trying to be a good senator and watching the board, reading legislation. About a week into it, I get a phone call. And for those of you who don't know about our phones, we've got these little bat phones underneath our desks with buttons that light up, and you have no idea who's calling you. We have no caller ID. So when you pick up the phone, it could be somebody you want to talk to or somebody you don't want to talk to. So I get the call, and I hear this, "Look up, freshman." So I look up, and there he is in all his glory. Thomas V. Mike Miller, Jr. "Are you listening to this debate?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "What do you think about the points being made?" I said, "It seems like they're pretty good points on both sides. Pretty contentious issue. Nobody cares about this bill. The sponsor's an idiot, and it's going down. I already got it arranged in the House. The bill's going to die in the House. Let's talk about something really important. Let's talk about Maryland football." So I'm sitting here, I'm thinking, well, should I be talking about football while we're listening? Well, okay, fine. He's the president, right? So he says, "Your son, James, he plays football for DeMatha Catholic, right?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "There's a 4-star on there that we need to get to go to Maryland. I want your son to get to know him, and I want him in Maryland." So I said, okay, first of all, I'm thinking, this is kind of creepy that he knows my son's name, he knows he plays. So I think, all right, well, this is my all other duties as assigned for being a senator. So I go home that night, I talk to my son. I said, "Do you know this guy?" He goes, yeah. "Dad, I think he's going to go to Maryland. He's got a bunch of offers, but I think he's going to Maryland because his mom wants him to stay at home." I said, "Great." So I come back, I call Mike on the phone, on the bat phone the next day, I knew he was going to go to Maryland. I'm the one who actually got him. There's 2 other kids on that team I need you to go get. So I started to realize that, this was one of my jobs in the Senate, or probably my main job. So a couple weeks later, we have a filibuster. And Mike had the president pro tem come up. He goes back in his office. I get another phone call. Get back here. I need to talk to you about some legislation. Okay, I go back there. He proceeds to have a file this thick of every single Maryland high school athlete that he wants to recruit to go to College Park. It didn't matter, men's or women's sports, field hockey, whatever. We are not going to let Florida and Michigan and Ohio State pilfer our people. Our Maryland athletes need to go to the University of Maryland and play sports. We got to protect our turf. So it was here that I realized that I was his assistant and he was the shadow athletic director of University of Maryland College Park. So he and I would go out to high school games, watching athletes. We'd talk about it. He'd call me on the phone. He would text me. I think he called Maryland's coaches once a week just to get a status of what was happening. And there was no end to how many mistakes the athletic director was making at University of Maryland. Everything they did, what coaches they hired, the facilities, etc. So if I was a good guy, if I was a good boy and I did my work, I would be invited to one of his 6 seats he had near the 50-yard line. Only privileged people could come to those seats. And he was very adamant that he buy his own tickets to the game. All these other freeloaders who go up to the president's box, they're just using the football game as scenery. They don't really care about Maryland sports like I do. So the beauty here, though, is that, Mike would beef a lot about Maryland athletics. But the truth is that he earned the right to do so. He got the Xfinity Center. He added the second level to the stadium. He brought them into the Big Ten. So he had a right to beef. And much like the Godfather, he had gone to the mattresses for Maryland, but he did and always asked for a favor one day. So, in a nutshell, Mike and I, like many of you here, shared a passion outside politics, something that we held true to each other. He made you feel special, and this was the hallmark of President Emeritus Mike Miller. Rest in peace, my fellow Terp. Your work is done. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. To the other side of the state, the senator from Western Maryland, Mountain Maryland, senator from District 1.
Thank you, Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen of the Senate. This is great that we can gather here in this great chamber today during this unique session to remember a unique person and friend. Before I came to the Senate, I spent time in the House. I really didn't pay a whole lot of attention to President Miller, because if I came to the Senate, I dealt with the committees. I was more concerned about what went on in the committee than what the President of the Senate was doing. But my last term in the House, I was a minority leader. And as my colleague said earlier, when you're in those positions, you get invited to a lot of breakfasts to speak, and usually it's the President of the Senate, the Speaker of the House, a minority leader on each side, and you tell them what you think or what's going on. Well, I got to know him a little better during that time frame. Thing was, he'd always go first. And the first couple times I thought, man, this guy knows his stuff. He's good, he's quick on his feet, he's witty. And so I would get up, he'd get done. I'd kind of look over at him and I'd say, okay, now you're going to hear the rest of the story, or the other side of the story. He'd look at me and grin. And he kind of did that throughout those kind of meetings that we had. When I did come over here, the first day, he called me into his office. And I thought, here we go. So he said, sit down. He said, I know you'd like to be on budget and tax because you were on appropriations for many years. But he said, I can't do that because you do things a little different in the Senate. You do in the House and go by seniority more than the House. He said, but hopefully in a little while down the road we can get you on budget and tax. Well, he put me on finance, which I knew hardly anything about, and stayed there for 1 year, and then because of certain circumstances in the Senate, they increased the number on budget and tax, and they added one Democrat and one Republican. So he put me on budget and tax, and I really appreciated that, and been there ever since. You've heard this before. He's always said we're one Maryland. We represent all of Maryland. He lived that. He just didn't say it. He lived that. He traveled throughout the state. He could tell you probably more about your neck of the woods than you could tell about it when he was there. We all need to do that a little more in this body. That we represent the whole state, although we're going to play favoritism to where we come from. That's just human nature. We have to open our eyes up and look at what's going on other places in the state. He knew, because where I come from, we have some different issues than any other part of the state. And he would always ask me how things were going. Can I help you? What do you need? And I told him, I said, look, I'll help you when I can help you, and when I can't help you, I'll let you know. Just let me know. And he would, on occasion, call me and say, can you help me out on certain issues, which I tried to do. And his door was always open, which is great. That's what a good leader does. Talks to the people he leads, or she leads, to get input from them. Every year, you all know people from the mountains come down here. And every year he would take time to meet with them in the lounge. And he always kind of told this one story. I don't know how many of you remember the movie Deliverance. Well, many years ago, probably before most of you in this room were here, we had the big Youghiogheny River incidents, where the state came in and usurped our authority and zoned it over the will of the county, because land use mainly is a county issue. Well, it actually did kind of turn into the deliverance theme, because people going down the river did get shot at on occasion. So one day, and I wasn't along on this trip, but he came up, and I think some DNR officials took him up the river. There's an old road, bouncy road, goes by the river. Some areas it drops off pretty good. And he'd always tell, he said, DNR or whoever was driving told him to get in the back of the pickup. It was a pickup. And he said they must have went 100 miles an hour down that road, bouncing around. He said, my knuckles were white holding on to the side of that bed. I think they're really trying to kill me, bounce me out of this pickup to kill me. And he'd laugh about it. But that's one thing. Another, just two quick things. Some of you were here when we had the second flush fee increase to $60 from $30. We were debating the bill, and I offered an amendment. And my amendment said, places in the state where the water doesn't go into the bay shouldn't have to pay the second $30. We're okay to pay the first $30. We should help out there. But why should we have to pay the second $30? Now, most of you that know the geography of the state of Maryland know there's only two places in the state that occurs. One's in Garrett County, 2/3 of it, and the other one's in the Ocean City area. So President Miller called for the vote. And he really wasn't, he thought it wasn't going to pass, so he didn't pay much attention. Called the vote, looked up, said, okay, amendment dies, move on. I'm looking up there, and a couple of my colleagues are pointing, no, you're wrong. He looked up again, looked over at me. He said, well, the senator from Western Maryland won that one. Now, during the start of this term, I called Jake, because I was a protocol committee for 4 years. Those of you who've done that know it takes a lot of time, particularly for your staff. So I said, I'd like to not be protocol committee chair again. takes a lot of my staff's time. I don't have a tremendous amount of staff, so maybe someone else can do it. So he said, okay. So he said, how about this one? I know some people in there take politics way more serious than I do, and I try to lighten it up a little bit. Some people don't like that, but that's tough. He said, how about this? He said, President would like you to be co-chair of the Ethics Committee. I said, Jake, I said, you guys know I'm a Republican, don't you? He laughed, said, yeah. I said, some people on that side, I might not like that. He said, Mike said, I don't give I'll let you fill in the blank. I want you to do it. I appreciate that. It shows his openness to people of all venues to be part of the process. We talked about Miller moments. We won't forget those Miller moments. You learn more history through those than you probably did in your history classes in school, because he knew his history, learned a lot from that. He'll go down in history as one of Maryland's greatest citizens, in my opinion, and he will be greatly missed, but he'll be remembered. Thank you, Mr. President.
Well said. Thank you, Senator. And Senator Miller's wife, Patty Miller, will be meeting us afterwards as we process out. So she has come to the State House for those who want to give socially distant greetings and regards to her. Chair recognizes Senator from Prince George's County.
Thank you, Mr. President. And in keeping with what you just said, there's my deepest condolences to Mrs. Miller and the entire Miller family. Mrs. Miller is such a kind spirit, and I thank her for being so welcoming to me and my family. Watching her and President Emeritus together, just really plain made me happy. Just the love that they shared amongst each other. That purity of love between the two of them was just such a blessing to behold. So God bless Mrs. Miller and the entire Miller family. There's a season for everything, and mine with the President Emeritus came not that long ago, as my cohort back here were elected to the Senate in 2018. I readily admit that I probably knew a different President Emeritus than many of you. A couple years older than my father, I treated him with the respect of an elder statesman. I was never comfortable calling him by his first name. I just couldn't do it. Honor. I can hear him say that word, like he said that word, honor. He used that word often, and it was central to his being, to what he felt the people of Maryland and his colleagues in the Senate bestowed upon him, the greatest honor of being a Maryland state senator and Senate president. My most memorable moment with the President Emeritus was not what he said to the Cardinal of the Archdiocese of Washington in a private conversation, which I will not repeat. It was after he told me my committee assignment in front of over 200 people at a banquet, to my great surprise. I'm sure you all have experienced learning something in such a way, right? After that, he called me into his office, and like what the senator from the 24th mentioned, it seemed like he was nervous. And I'm just saying to myself, my gosh, why is he nervous? I'm this brand new person just here, newly elected, not even sworn in yet, no idea what's going on. He said to me, I hope you will vote for me for Senate president. I'm saying to myself, is this real? Is this real? Senate president? I mean, the legend is asking me for a vote for Senate president. I just couldn't believe it as this lowly freshman. But to me, it epitomized the fact that this man took nothing for granted, particularly a vote on something he held so dear, the honor of serving as president of the Maryland State Senate. He respected me as a senator, elected by the people of my district, to serve them and the people of the state of Maryland. In fact, he always reminded me to listen to and stay close to my constituents, to be responsive to what they need and want at all times. Never forget who honored me with the privilege of serving in this body. But he also taught me that we have a dual responsibility to our district and the state, and to embody that title, state senator. When I had the privilege to tag along with him, there was not a corner of the state of Maryland or seemingly a person within it that he did not have a story about, or an anecdote to share, or an insight into what made them tick. It seemed like everyone that the conversation started with, Maryland, started with, I just have to thank you, Mr. President, for some favor or intervention he had done, and he remembered them all, providing details of the occurrence. I was always just amazed. He was just such a retail politician who was comfortable in any setting. I went to him asking for advice often, and he always answered the phone or opened the door for me to come in and get schooled. I tell you, I just really enjoyed and loved those moments, actually. And honestly, I couldn't always keep up with the lessons because, as many of you know, the President Emeritus would often speak in riddles. And it was just like, I wasn't quite sure what he was saying. And so I would just like nod and, I would try to keep up. And he would just guide me and tell me what to do. But, I also knew, as a person of action, he was working behind the scenes to help me through without telling me what or how he was getting it done. But he was going to get it done. Miraculously, problems would be solved. He fixed problems. He constantly was fixing problems. And as a student of history and with such longevity, he already knew the outcome of many of the issues well before they played out. He was just a master tactician. The greatest lesson, without a doubt, that the Senate President Emeritus taught me was to subjugate yourself to the Senate. Do what was best for the body, a body he so loved, that he revered in its history. The bravest and most difficult subjugation was when he stepped down as president of the Senate to ensure a smooth transition, and similarly from the Senate itself to allow the people of the 27th District that he loved so dearly to have the full representation that they deserve, and that his body no longer allowed him to give. The ultimate expression of honor in a way that only he, our President Emeritus, could give. I will miss him. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Chair recognizes the Senator from Anne Arundel County.
Thank you, Mr. President. And first, I do want to say my deepest sympathy to Patty and to all the children, Missy, Michelle, Melanie, Amanda, and Tommy, and all the grandchildren that he loves so much. Thank you for sharing our President Emeritus with us all these years. My Mike Miller story is a little different than a lot that you've heard today. It's about my first election when I was running for county council against one of the Senate president's friends, the brother of a retired senator. Obviously, the Senate president was supporting my opponent. Unfortunately, I was so naive to politics, I didn't understand the challenge of running against a candidate that had the president's support. But when I won, Mike graciously congratulated me on the night of the primary. He represented a small piece of Anne Arundel County at the time, and I did not know much about politics in the beginning of my elected career, but I knew when Mike Miller reached out to me, it was important, and I was beginning to catch on. There were a few times in my time as the council that Mike sent messages to me, and whatever the issue was got taken care of. So while Mike may not have supported me in my first campaign for the county council, he certainly supported me for my campaign for Senate. My fondest memory was a Saturday morning that he showed up at our campaign headquarters to help my team canvass. He brought a ton of people that were willing to help. We had over 100 people that day to help us knock on doors, and some of the senators in this room were there thanks to Mike Miller's leadership and encouragement. His wish was that we would help each other. I just wish I'd had more time with Mike. I really didn't get to know him as well as I would like to, but I always enjoyed my time with him in his office. And after the election, Mike would come to my fundraisers, every fundraiser, and he'd announce to the room that I was going to be on budget and tax. Right after the election, he called me into the office and he said, "You're going to be on finance," which turned out, I think, to be the best place for me. I think Mike knew all of us, and he really knew where we belonged. And he told me if I didn't like finance after a year, he'd find a place for me on budget and tax. But I'm very happy where I am. So that was a great decision, Mike. So I think everyone in this room was new to the Senate when our President Emeritus was the Senate President. I think every one of us here felt his support as he mentored us. He was a great friend to us, and it was amazing that he remembered so many personal details, and you've heard about that today. He knew our families, our children's names, our careers, where we graduated from. He always enjoyed sharing stories about his family, and Mike was so very proud of his family. I was always amazed that Mike would come in very often from the dais on a Monday and talk about all the things he had done that weekend, all the activities he'd attended, even after his diagnosis. He would talk about the Eagle Scout ceremonies and the ribbon cuttings and the banquets. And I was just amazed at his energy and his lifetime in public service. He still loved this job and was energized by his constituents and his communities. He served the people of District 27 for 50 years. He was truly a servant leader. When President Miller made the decision to step down from his position of presiding over the Senate, he made that selfless decision for this body, for each one of us. He did not want us to have to hold an emergency and contentious election like happened across the hall. But I know it was one of the hardest decisions he ever made to give up something he loved, because he loved this body and he loved presiding over the Senate. My last conversation with Mike was on his birthday, and I could tell that he wasn't doing well. He talked about his pain. But I think this will make all of you chuckle. He knew about my business background, and he reminded me that I was a business owner and knew that we couldn't spend more money than our revenues would support. He told me that I needed to draw on my business background and be responsible about the spending. So, Chairman Gazzoni, I think I have a little job to do this year. I don't know. President Mike Miller was larger than life. He loved the Senate. He loved each one of us. When he resigned on December 23rd, I'm sure it was not a coincidence that it was the same day that George Washington resigned his commission. But I knew this meant that he was truly failing. It took a great deal of personal strength for him to give up the Senate that he loved so dearly. President Emeritus Thomas V. Mike Miller will always be remembered by this body and the people of Maryland as a leader that changed Maryland for the better. Rest in peace, Mike Miller. A job well done.
Thank you, Senator. Chair recognizes the Senator from Baltimore City.
Thank you, Mr. Senate President. I don't believe that it's much more that I can say that everyone else hasn't said, but I'll try to say how he impacted me in my own little way. I think that there's three words that I just like to continue to keep reading back to is family, student, and history. As I think about my first meeting with Mike Miller, I think about how I went in the meeting thinking that he was going to talk about all of these different things, but you know what he talked about? He talked about family. He talked about his family store. He talked about how he learned about public service from that family store. He talked about how he learned about hard work from that family store. And then he asked me about my family. He asked me about Kennedy. He asked me about Reagan. He asked me about CJ, and he asked me about Bryson. He asked me about my wife, Demetria. And as I left out of that first meeting with Senator Miller, I knew that we didn't talk about the Senate. We didn't talk much about politics. I was still in the House of Delegates at that moment. And I said, man, that was pretty cool, and I did not expect that, but all we did was talk about family. And then I think about the student piece. And I think about how many of us looked at Senator Miller as a teacher. But I watched him a lot, and I really thought that he was a consistent learner and obedient student. I watched as we battle these tough issues and how he looked at the issues as a fire and how close he would get to the fire in order to understand and navigate those waters for these tough issues. And I think about so many people that I've interacted with, and I knew that not many people would get that close to the fire. But he did it consistently each and every time. I think about the relationship that he had with each and every one of us and tried his best to get to know each and every one of us. And I knew that he didn't just know that, but he was a consistent student. Some of the things that I watched out for was he didn't just pay attention to this body. Just looked at the role that he played on a national level, whether it was organizations such as CSG, organizations such as NCSL. So many organizations he played such a large role in. And I paid attention and I said, that is one of the greatest students that you can watch. And last, I think about history. And I think about how a number of us have talked about how Senator Miller was an avid reader. And I think about after the election, Senator Miller would hand me 2 books. He picked me up 2 books. He picked me up one about Charles Carroll of Carrollton, and I got to learn about a gentleman, as stated before, that was served in the Senate, that was served in the United States Senate, but one of the interesting facts was that there was a point in time in his life where he couldn't even participate in his own government. And I think about the second book that he handed me, Mutual Contempt. He said, I heard that you really enjoy LBJ. And he gave the book about mutual contempt. For those that knew it, it was Bobby Kennedy and LBJ's relationship. And I walked out that room and I said, is he trying to say he's LBJ and I'm little Bobby? But the last one that I think about is the unique opportunity to sit right across from Al, Senate President Emeritus. And to watch him say some of the most interesting comments, or hear him say some of the most interesting comments, and ask, did he really say that? But I think about when the unveiling of the portrait that we see right there of Senator Verda Welcome. And I can remember the Senate President whispering and saying, I got an autobiography of Verda Welcome. And I Googled it really quick because that's what young folks do. And I said, I can't find this thing anywhere on the internet because I was going to purchase it. And he said, I'm going to go try to find it for you, Corey. So the first time I said, hey, did you find that book? And he said, no. The second time I said, did you find that book? And he said, no, I got to keep looking. And I'm thinking, man, he must have lost it. He don't have a book on Verda Welcome. He must be losing it. But that third time I asked, he said, you know what? I found that book. And if you all knew how good that book was, the Baltimore history that was in that book, how she had personally signed the book to Senate President Emeritus Mike Miller, Power to Prince George's, Forever Verda Welcome. And I thought about it, and as I read it, I said, man, I can't give this book back. So I came back, and I was the nervousness of saying, how do I ask him to keep his book that's personally signed to him? But he said, no, I'd already planned on giving you that book. And I think about, because it's very hard to find and it can't be found, I thought about Kennedy and Reagan at that moment. And I thought about the opportunity to share, and as we press upon these great leaders in Baltimore City, in the history of Victorine Adams, Verda Welcome, Elijah Cummings, Perrin Mitchell. And I think this gentleman got to serve with all of them in some form of capacity. And I thought about how much of a great man that he was. As I close, one of the things that I think about is, did you give it all you got? I wake up every morning and I ask myself, did I give all that I got? And as I stand here speaking before you all, I know that Mike Miller gave all he got to the 27th District. I know that Mike Miller gave all he got to the state of Maryland. I know that every one of us in this room at this moment know that Mike Miller gave everything he got to the Maryland State Senate. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Chair recognizes the senator from Carroll and Howard counties.
Thank you, Mr. President. I agree with everything that's been said thus far. For the past 2 years, I've had the privilege and honor of sitting next to President Emeritus Mike Miller on the Senate floor. And in that short time, I tried to learn as much history as I could. But what I really took away from those past 2 years were the lessons that he taught me on a daily basis. Lessons in grace and humility, perspective, strength, and courage. And while his advice on politics has made me a better legislator, it's his humanity that I'm really going to remember and cherish forever. And so I just have a few short stories from this perspective, this seat next to this seat. So as a freshman senator 2 years ago, there were several things I was nervous about because I had not been in the House. And when I learned I was sitting next to President Mike Miller, I was like, Jake, there's a mistake. I'm not supposed to be sitting next to the president. What if I do something wrong? What if I said something wrong? What if I'm late? Well, I was late a few times. But what I learned is that despite being, a political power broker and this larger-than-life president, he was also incredibly humble. As the good senator said, he used the word honor a lot. And I would look at him sometimes and say, President, I'm so honored to sit next to you. And he'd look at me and he said, no, I'm honored to sit next to you. And he meant it. And that was the incredible thing, one of the incredible things about President Miller. Eventually I learned that he chose to sit next to me. And that was just a great honor. But he chose to sit next to me so he could coach me and support me. Family was everything to President Miller, and I felt almost like an adopted niece. As I'm sure many of you can relate, Mike had my back and he had your back. And he appointed me, first he appointed me to JPR, and I really didn't want to be in JPR, but he called and checked up on me to make sure I was okay. And then, as a female engineer in the Senate, he appointed me to co-chair the Joint Committee on Cyber, IT, and Biotech. And he did that because he knew I would be successful and he wanted to see me succeed. As a freshman senator, I sponsored our first Bring Your Kid to Work Day, or Senator for a Day, and he loved it, and he helped make it happen. And I still have the certificate that he signed for each of my daughters. Last year, I noticed that his health was deteriorating. He was still always in his seat before me, and I was still occasionally late. Regardless, he was ready with a smile, that twinkle in his eye, and a warm greeting. And I would say, "Good morning, Mr. President. How are you today?" He'd say, "Oh, the pain is terrible. But I am so blessed. I am so blessed because I have a wonderful wife and wonderful kids and 15 grandkids." And he said that every day. He had his priorities and his sense of perspective straight. And he could laugh at himself. He spilled his water more than once. I had to help him with his laptop computer. And it took him a long time to learn how to vote. He'd vote too early, before the clerk called the roll. And so it wouldn't register to me, Mike, you gotta vote. So he could laugh at himself, and we had fun back here. So it's the sum of these little things that really are big things that will keep this powerful legend, this blessed family man, this humorous historian, this mentor and friend in my heart. President Miller, I have full confidence that you're listening. Save me a seat up there. I'm going to be late. God bless you.
Thank you, Senator. Chair recognizes the Senator from Baltimore City.
Thank you, Mr. President. I understand. Don't look at that picture when you're talking. I was quite surprised to be invited to participate in this memorial today. My response when I got the call was, me? In large part because when I first started as a delegate, Mike Miller was already larger than life. He was brash, arrogant, vindictive, and sometimes mean. We sometimes fought, and we've heard today what a formidable opponent he can be. And sometimes we fought hard. It was an antagonistic relationship. I was not aware of his brilliance because the word he most often used when approaching me was behave. And he pretty much said that every single time I saw him. I thought, what century is this man in? Because that's not right. And I knew he had to have some connection to the modern world because I'd gone to law school with his son Tommy, who was like totally cool and unassuming. And I'm like, well, if that's his son, surely he has to have some connection to the century. When I first became a senator, Mike was less than thrilled, having worked to defeat me. But I quickly began to see a different side. I saw warmth. He was considerate and indeed generous. He made me feel very at home in the Senate. Dare I say, we became friends. I regret that it took so long for me to get to know the true Mike Miller, but I am grateful. I'm grateful that I got the opportunity. I'm grateful for the 1 year that I served while he was still president. Every day I came into this chamber, my life was enriched by his comedic genius and historic monologues. I will miss them. Mike Miller loved the Senate the way that I love social justice. For many years, Mike Miller was the Senate. Mike Miller was, is, and will always be a senator. Not just a member of the Senate, but the very embodiment of what it means. Many will tout Mike's bold political prowess, but I prefer to remember his wit, his generosity, and his great sense of humor. I'll miss him calling over to me from his seat on the floor once he stepped down as president. Jill, this is a bad bill. Jill, did you vote for this? Jill, are you going to sit here and let them say that? Are you going to just take this? We had a lot in common because we had both spent a great part of our legal careers in criminal courtrooms. Some of the other comments, and other people have mentioned this today, some of the other commentary was that of the blunt kind that only Mike Miller could get away with saying, and so I won't repeat it. Mike Miller and I were strange compatriots, but we were kindred spirits. Mike loved his district, as we've heard. Mike gave his heart to the state of Maryland. It took a while, but I'm so glad that I finally got to know him. For that, I am both deeply glad and profoundly sad. I think Mike would like the fact that in thinking of his legacy today, I looked up Thucydides, probably didn't say that right, who was the father of political realism. And I found a quote that I think is very befitting for Mike Miller and how I feel about him and how many of us do. What you leave behind is not what is engraved in stone monuments, but it is what is woven into the lives of others. For having accomplished that, President Emeritus Thomas Vincent Mike Miller, you can be very proud and rest in peace. I grew to love Mike Miller, and every conversation that we had, he would end with, "Love you, kid." And I would think that was kind of funny. I think that I just would sum up the reason that we had such a great affinity for each other and why I will miss him tremendously is the hip-hop ideology of real, recognize real. Thank you.
Well said. Our final tribute today is fitting.
Mr. President.
The senator from the 27th District.
Sorry about that. Mr. President, colleagues, I appreciate this opportunity to speak about Senate Emeritus, Senate President Emeritus Thomas V. Mike Miller, person who mentored me, selected me twice to be the delegate of 27B, a newly created district which straddled 2 counties. He said, "You'll do fine, just don't look at the map. Believe in me, don't look at the map." I still haven't figured that one out. But let me, before I say a few more words, let me pour out my heart to Miss Patty and the family, a family I've known since 1988. When I joined the mighty Team 27 in former delegate Joe Valerio's barn on his farm where they painted signs by hand, and my sheriff at the time would draft folks to work on campaigns. So unbeknownst to most of them, or any of them, couldn't say that back then, my goal was to be sheriff of Prince George's County. So every 2 years I was in that barn, and wherever they sent us to go out on the campaign trail. So, you know, tough and seemingly impenetrable, as Mike Miller could be and seemed to most. I had an opportunity to see the tough and impenetrable, but also the caring side of him. He would he would come to my fundraisers, and he would mention to me, man, I wish I had what you have. Your parents are here. My parents were never able to come to my events. And then your family is here. That's something I will never forget, that inside that tough and impenetrable individual was a man with a heart. So publicly, he would mention those things, but also publicly, he had a certain way of greeting folks in any county. Everyone knew him. And when we sit here, I had the honor of sitting with him during legislative nights, whether it was the League of Women Voters or whether it was the Calvert County commissioners or Prince George's County or what have you. And every one of us who was sitting there vying for either to be to get prepared for the legislative session or to get elected, we would give our comments, trying to stay in spirit with the constituency in front of us. And it was unbelievable that every year in my legislative life that he would stand up last. The Lion of the Senate would stand up and he would say, "Thank you, folks. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for having us here. This is great. This is a great evening. Thank you." And he would name them all. And then he would say, "But you know, you're probably not going to get any of this. Thank you all for having us here this evening, and love you, and we'll see you in Annapolis." Only he could get away with that. But he did it every year. Each and every year, and every one of those constituencies loved him. On a lighter note, let me just mention a couple of things that I'll miss. I'll miss those phone calls that led with Mike Jackson, Mike Miller, or Sheriff, Mike Miller. And then he would lead into, you know, I never asked you for a favor. I never do. But I need you to do this for me. I need you to do this for this constituency. So I need you to call this person, good person for you to know. When I think back, a couple of folks mentioned earlier, when I think back about the many meetings I've had with him, and I've had many, from FOP president, got pretty rocky, to sheriff of the county, pretty smooth sometimes, and could be rocky. Calls that I would get from the troopers who were assigned to him, asking me to meet him at some undisclosed location in which I knew it was going to be pretty rocky. However, I always knew that I would receive, after a while I knew, that I would receive a follow-up call shortly thereafter, as if nothing ever happened. But I think one of the most important things, I think one of the most impactful things about Senator Miller, and the impact that he's had on every one of us here and all he's served with. You know, I had this lighthearted term for him. I called him the Master Riddler. Because quite frankly, folks, I can tell you, out of the many meetings I've had with him, I have no idea what went on in those meetings. So I ended up resorting to carrying around the sticky packs, the little sticky pads, where I would write my thoughts prior to the meeting to go in, which I never really got to my thoughts because he controlled the meeting. And then when I left, I'd sit in my car and I tried to write down what happened. And so if any of you all have ever watched Being Mary Jane and watching her stick these little sticky pads on her mirrors and windows, that's Mike Jackson dealing with Mike Miller trying to figure out what the heck just went on in that conversation. And I can tell you, while my good friend is lying in state today, I was sitting in my office before coming to the floor, speaking with staff about what in the heck were those last conversations about, and what was in those conversations that I'm supposed to complete. So lastly, let me wrap this up. I'll say this. Some of his classic terms, Mike Jackson, Mike Miller. When he had a conversation with me about stepping down, and I couldn't fathom it. I couldn't figure out this, as one person who has known him since 1971 said to me, Mike Miller plays a triangulated chess game that none of us has ever been able to figure out. He said, look, I want you to know this. I'm going to have a press conference. I'm going to meet with the Senate, and I'm going to have a press conference. I am stepping down from the presidency, and I'm going to take the position of senator. And I could not figure out what he was talking about. I couldn't figure out how that made sense. But in his mind, he had made rational sense of what that meant because of his love for this body and this chamber. I couldn't figure it out. Here I am, a guy who served as sheriff of Prince George's County and decided to retire. I said, are you kidding me? That's like me saying, I no longer want to be the sheriff of Prince George's County. I just want to go back and be a deputy. Man, they would eat me alive. Some folks would love to have me on their squad. I said, this makes zero sense. What are you talking about? He says, stop it, stop it, stop it. Listen to me, listen to me, listen to me. I love that place. I'm honored to be in that place. We need a peaceful transition, a normal transition. I don't like chaos. I like order. In order to ensure that, this is what we're going to do. We'll be fine. We'll be fine. We'll be fine. And thank you, thank you, thank you. Bye, bye, bye. Love you, love you. And just hoisted me out. So I went to my car, and I wrote on my sticky pad, what in the heck just happened? So lastly, Mr. President and my colleagues, as tough as this is, this whirlwind of the last 4 weeks for me, the decision to step away from the Senate when he decided to do that. That decision, then to support me in the 3 constituencies that came with that. He says, listen to me. Listen to me. This is very important. It's very important to me that you do not, I can't say the word, tick off these 3 constituencies. It is very important to me. I've never asked you for anything, which was always another term, but I need to make sure that you stay honored to serve them. Everything's going to be fine. Everything's going to be fine. Bye, bye, bye. Love you, love you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Chair recognizes the Majority Leader.
Yes, Mr. President. I move the Senate of Maryland adjourn in honor of our colleague and friend, Senator President Emeritus Thomas V. Mike Miller, Jr., until Tuesday, January 26th at 10 a.m.
Without objection and with love, so adjourned.
11 o'clock, not 10, 11 on Tuesday. Thank you.